Hello, and welcome to Grant's Tech World. Today we're talking about the wonderful, although slightly irritating, world of Linux. No, that's Lance Sebastian. He from the. Oh no, that's Anthony. You're getting farther away. That's Linus Torvalds. You're getting closer, but we'll get to him later. And there's my boy Tux, the mascot of Linux. And yes, Linux do be cool like that. So today we're talking about the world of Linux. Welcome to Grant's Tech World. I hope you enjoy. Before we begin this video, I need to give a disclaimer. This video is based on my personal experience running Linux Mint and my AMD-based system. So I have an AMD Ryzen 5 3400G and an RX 470. If you have different hardware than me or are using a different distro, your results and experiences may vary. So please take that into consideration when we get to toward the end of the video where I talk about my experiences in certain areas. With that out of the way, let's get on with the rest of the video. Let's start the video off with a question. What is Linux? Well, Linux refers to the kernel that a family of operating systems is based upon. It was developed in the 1990s and continues to be developed today by Linus Torvalds, and its goal was to be a community-created and community-developed kernel for a wide range of operating systems. When most people hear the word Linux, though, they tend to think of the distributions, or distros, that are actually what run on your system. And so these include things like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora Linux, and many, many more. There are probably literally hundreds of distros. The big appeal, though, is that anyone with enough knowledge can create their own distro or offer up suggestions for changes to the Linux kernel, which means that if everything is open source and everyone can access changes that have been made and peek around in things, it ensures that security and stability is always at the top of the priority list. Now we get to the bulk of the video. Should you right there, you behind the camera, I'm pointing at my phone right now, I probably look like a madman. Should you be using Linux? And the answer is, well, there's a big caveat before we get to the answer. Linux is usually seen as an alternative to most other operating systems, be it Chrome OS, Windows, Mac OS, or heck, even like their Android tablet. They see it as an alternative. But rather, instead of seeing Linux as an alternative, you need to see Linux and Linux distros as their entirely different operating system and as another option and ecosystem. Because if you think about it, you wouldn't expect to run, like industrial class software that you would run on a Windows machine on a Chromebook or a Mac, and vice versa, and between all the different operating systems. And so when you think about Linux, Linux is an alternative. It's an option, and that should be noted first and foremost. However, we're going to cover a few areas where if you're thinking of switching to Linux or building a computer specifically for running a Linux distro, we're going to get to a few areas where you might want to be considering whether or not you should make the changeover. Let's start with just everyday basic computer use. This includes things, web surfing, business tasks, and other basic things. And for this, Linux is just like everything else. Most of the distros have your favorite browsers. They have great office suites. I personally use LibreOffice that comes pre-installed with Linux Mint. And they have all of the apps and features you'd want. There's onboard email clients if you're still one of those people. And the thing is that just generally using Linux, it's the same as any other, I almost said distribution. It's the same as any other operating system, right? Everything you need to do is going to be right there and available to you. And so if you're looking to maybe revive an old PC for a family member, or just want something that's simple for you to use, is not going to bug you constantly, a Linux distro like Linux Mint or Elementary OS or Zoner OS might be the way to go. But you fancy people are saying, what about gaming? Can I game on Linux? And the answer is, perhaps. So the thing with Linux gaming is that, at least in recent years, it's come a really long way. And the big reason it has is two things: Steam and the Steam Deck. So if you didn't know, the Steam Deck is Valve's sort of, it's like a portable PC This runs a Linux distribution, which allows them to completely customize everything and make it super specific so that it runs at maximum performance. There's nothing loading it down and there's no bloatware. And that's great, right? Because it means that with compatibility layers, which Steam particularly uses Proton, many games are going to have to start adapting to be just as good natively on like Windows as they are natively on a Linux distribution, or develop for Linux distributions first and foremost. And so really, gaming is pretty good as long as you use Steam. There are some games, yes, that will have Windows versions, macOS versions, and Linux versions, and they may not be on Steam, but you can download them from a website. But if they don't, you're kind of out of luck. Most pre-release games, Windows exclusives, PC Game Pass exclusives, heck, Mac exclusives if you're that kind of weird person. Exclusive games on exclusive platforms obviously won't run, but for the majority of the games, you'll see at or near the same performance as you would on other operating systems. So now we start to get to the sketchy, crappy, and eventually worst side of Linux. And that is, we're starting off at least, with graphic design and 3D modeling. So just general graphic design, like I'm talking Photoshopping, which really Photoshop probably doesn't even have a copyright and a trademark for that anymore, because you all just say Photoshopping, and vector design, those are great. You know, there are lots of apps that allow you to edit photos or edit vector graphics. In general, they're just good. I mean, they work pretty well. There are obviously some features that might be missing, and the integration that you'd find with, say, Adobe software isn't going to be there, but in general, it does work okay. 3D modeling is in a similar vein. Blender and FreeCAD are the two that I kind of use, although I've kind of strayed away from 3D modeling recently. But Blender is just like the Blender version on Windows and Mac and anywhere else you can find it, and so it works pretty good. And FreeCAD is available on Windows as well, and it works okay. But the issue is that these tasks don't really push your graphics that hard. You know, gaming kind of does, but that's a specialized area. With graphics-heavy tasks like 3D rendering, or just rendering in general, it's going to struggle, right? With Blender, generally you can only get CPU rendering on Linux, which might be a big deal. And that's kind of starting to be the issue, is that in certain applications, especially graphics-intense applications, you're not going to find the support that you would have on other platforms. So we went from the okay to the meh, and now we're at the ugly. And that is content creation. No, you cannot be a content creator in Linux. Full stop. My tablet just fell. Gosh dang it. That's how bad Linux is, that my tablet falls. Content creation on Linux is just not where it needs to be. And this is the major issue. Premiere Pro, simply not available on Linux. And DaVinci Resolve, it literally has fallen so far out of support for Linux, I think the distro died that it was meant to run on. And so you're stuck using free GNU or whatever it is based video editors like Kdenlive, OpenShot I think it is, and there was another one I was playing around the other day, I'll put it up here. And those are great. They took a lot of time to develop, and I respect their developers. But being critical here, they're just not going to live up to what I can get if I just reboot back into Windows and use DaVinci Resolve. And it's really a shame, because it could be good. There's nothing stopping it from being good except for support. Support that, say, DaVinci Resolve, the people behind it is Blackmagic Design. Blackmagic Design just isn't going to take the time to develop their software for Linux because it's just not feasible. Because no one is a content creator on Linux. And I say that, and if you are, that's okay. But no one is a content creator on Linux, and no one will ever be, because if no one's on Linux, no one's going to develop for it. And no one's going to develop the plugins and the support and the workarounds that are needed. And that's the big issue, and that's why I only really use Linux for personal use. But let's stop being sappy and let's get to the conclusion. So, initial question, should you be using a Linux distro? If you're an everyday computer user, yeah, go ahead. I personally use Linux Mint most of the time. And it works just great. I mean, I have a freaking plane simulator on there. That is great. X-Plane 11, shout out to Lamar Research. What they do is amazing. And they're continuing to develop, which is also amazing. It also runs natively on Linux. Mwah. But if you're just doing basic stuff, then yeah, it'll work. And if you're even like high-level programming should work on Linux, although it doesn't make a huge deal of sense if you're developing for something like Windows or Mac OS. But I know that a lot of people, when they think of Linux, especially in the computer space, they think of programming because it's just so versatile. And if you're a gamer, everyday use programming, even like light graphic design work, it'll work for you. But if you're in that one special category of content creation, it might not. And there's always the learning curve, even if you're not in content creation. And so that's where I want to leave this video. If you're willing to, go ahead. I love it, and you might too. But if you take the time to research and you're like, this just won't work for me, don't feel bad. It's okay. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all your support. If you'd like to support me more, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below what future distro you're going to use, what you're using now, or maybe what you left. And that's an option too. Thank you so much for watching.